Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another edition of our webinar series, Inside Immigration. Today, we're joined by panelists at Green & Spiegel, Shannon Camp and Peter Salerno. Please feel free to ask any questions via the pop-up text bar on the right side of your screen, and we'll do our best to address them at the end. If the panelists do not get your question, you can contact them through the information provided on the screen. And with that being said, I'll hand things over to our panelists.
Okay, thanks, Danielle. Happy New Year, everyone. I think we can still say that. So thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to this webinar. We're just going to go through a few updates, focusing on most recent updates on any changes, anything that's occurred within immigration in the past few months. You'll see we have an agenda that's just popped up, and those are the general topics we're going to be addressing. And as Danielle mentioned, if you have any questions, just pop them into the chat. All right, and I think Peter is going to start us off with some info about Express Entry.
That's right. Thanks, Shannon. Nice to be with everyone today. Thank you for joining us. So as Shannon said, the first topic we wanted to cover was Express Entry. As some of you may know, this is Canada's electronic application system for foreign nationals wanting to apply for permanent residence in Canada. Broadly speaking, Canada had stopped issuing invitations to apply for permanent residence for many months due to the pandemic to reduce backlogs. The invitations to apply started being issued again in the summer of 2022. The minimum score needed to receive an invitation to apply for permanent residence went up drastically. So in the summer of 2022, the minimum score needed was about 462. And when the government reopened the Express Entry pool, the first draw was in July of 2022. The minimum score needed was 557. So the scores are much higher than they were before the pandemic. Since the summer of 2022, over the last few months, the scores have gone down. For example, the most recent draw that occurred January 18, just last week, the minimum score needed was 490 to receive an invitation to apply for permanent residence. Before that, a week prior, the minimum score needed was 507. So there seems in the last few weeks, let's say, for the scores to be trending downward, and we hope, as do many of our clients, that the scores continue to go down. The government's target for 2023 is to welcome about 465,000 new permanent residents. So we're hoping the score will go down, but we unfortunately don't know exactly how far the score will be reduced, if it will be at all. The only other update I'd want to mention for Express Entry is that there has been talk by the government about introducing occupation-specific draws, as opposed to, as of right now, draws catered for Canadian experienced class workers, those who have at least 1 year of high-skilled work experience in Canada, as well as federal skilled workers, people who have accumulated high-skilled work overseas. There is discussion, and it seems like there will only be a matter of time before the government introduces draws that are geared towards specific occupations, and the selection will be made based on key attributes that the government wants to support. It's meant to make the Express Entry system more responsive to economic priorities. So that is on the horizon. We unfortunately don't know when exactly that will happen, but it is expected in the next few months.
And Peter, what would you say, how are these high numbers and high cutoffs, how are they affecting applicants?
Well, those in the pool who as of last year or the year, let's say before the pandemic, who would have received invitations to apply are not receiving invitations to apply because the scores are higher. So people with 480, 470 scores in the Express Entry pool who are waiting for invitations are unfortunately still waiting because the scores have been so high. So really, unless your score is around the 500 mark, the last few months since the draws started happening again, you're going to be waiting. So clients are eagerly waiting, in my experience. They're just eagerly waiting for these scores to drop.
Right, which also then puts some people into situations that normally, you know, in the past, we would have expected them to be able to get permanent residence and maybe not need an extension of their temporary status. And now they're in situations where they need to find ways to extend that status, whereas say pre-pandemic or even maybe mid-pandemic, we were able to, well, early pandemic, let's say, you know, maybe they would have had PR as an option instead of extending work permits. And now we have people turning to labor market impact assessments who otherwise maybe wouldn't have needed them. So some requirements to be a little more creative or you know, a little more aggressive on the temporary side versus waiting and expecting the PR to be the solution.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So you want to move on to?
Sure. So the next topic we wanted to cover, not too much, thankfully, to cover in terms of travel restrictions. Compared to during the pandemic, there were a significant number of new restrictions and requirements when entering Canada for Canadian citizens as well as foreign nationals entering Canada. As of right now, there are really only restrictions for select places, including China, Hong Kong, and Macau. These restrictions have been in effect since January 5, and they're expected to be in effect for 30 days. We're not quite sure what's going to happen after the 30 days. Foreign nationals coming or really any travelers coming from these locations will be required to provide evidence of a negative COVID test, and tests must be taken within 2 days of their departure. I think one other takeaway is really that the government is showing, as a result of implementing these travel restrictions, that they are remaining responsive to the ongoing COVID situation around the world, and I think the government is showing that their willingness to impose travel restrictions again should the need arise. So hopefully the restrictions are reduced and stay non-existent, but I think it just shows that the government is responsive and is showing that they're willing to bring the restrictions back if necessary, depending on the local circumstances around the world.
Yeah, I think this in some ways was a bit of a surprise to us because we were kind of getting used to zero restrictions for anyone.
That's right.
And then this was brought back, kind of reminded us all that it's still possible that there could be restrictions. We don't anticipate it at this point. We are not hearing anything about it being expanded, but it does, you're right, it shows us that it's a possibility. It's not completely gone. Okay.
All right.
So I will address the expansion of the access to the global talent stream. The global talent stream is an expedited stream of a type of labor market impact assessment, a stream within that program. So generally speaking, with any labor market impact assessment, what we're demonstrating is that there is a labor market shortage, or that there are no Canadian citizens or permanent residents coming forward to be able to fulfill a position. So the global talent stream was introduced quite a few years ago, and it has been a popular program, particularly category D, which lists certain occupations that fall within it. And the idea is that these are occupations that the government knows are under stress and have there's a high need for them. So it's not, there's no negative impact on the Canadian labor market to bring people in from other countries to fulfill these positions. It includes a list of occupations. The benefit of the program is that processing is expedited. It's about a 2-week turnaround, and really they've been consistent with that even throughout the pandemic. This is probably about the one program that maintained their processing times And we still see that. Sometimes it's a little bit longer in Quebec because there's an additional requirement of a CAQ from the provincial government. But generally speaking, it's about a 2-week turnaround, which is quite nice. In return for this expedited processing, the other benefit is that you don't have to advertise these positions. It's just acknowledged that there's a shortage. So there's no requirement to advertise as you would normally do in a regular LMIA. In return for that, the company has to make some commitments to support the Canadian labor market. So things like training staff, hiring interns, these type of commitments become part of it. So it has typically, the list of occupations, it's typically really been IT focused. Software engineers, programmers, that kind of role. And in December, they added some new occupations for the first time. They are still in the tech realm, but they are quite new. We have not seen this before. So the new ones that are included are civil engineers, electrical and electronics engineers, mining engineers, aerospace engineers, and electrical and electronics engineering technologists and technicians. So these are really engineering roles. Not all the engineers are on there, so do keep in mind it's not anyone who's an engineer necessarily, but this is the first we've seen these roles on here. So it's expanded, and it may be beneficial to some employers who previously couldn't access this program, in the more engineering realm. Now they may have that possibility. It really is, our clients really seem to like the program. I find the first application's a bit painful, but then after you get that one under your belt, future applications go quite nicely. So people seem to like it, and this is nice that we have this expanded access. All right, so I will move on to the IEC. This is International Experience Canada. So this is a particular program. I'm not sure if people will be familiar with it. It's really geared to young people, usually between the ages of 18 and 35, sometimes 30, depending on the country. It's based on agreements that Canada has reached with individual countries. So eligibility for this program is really based on citizenship and largely on age. So young people from particular countries where we have this agreement in place. The interesting thing about it is because it's an agreement, there's always or in most cases, there's a cap on the number of candidates who can apply and be successful under this program. There's also a few different programs within the IEC. There's the working holiday, and there's also the young professionals. There's also a co-op program. We don't use the co-op program too much because it's usually affiliated with getting experience and credit for university programs, and most people tend to work with their universities to do that. But we do a lot of working holiday and young professionals. The young professionals does require a job offer, so it leads to a closed work permit where it specifies the employer, and the employer needs to include information about salary, etc. And then the working holiday is a really good option for people who maybe don't have a job lined up yet. They can come to Canada. The idea behind it, the concept, is that they can come to Canada, they can work, they can travel, they can be here while they can gain a little bit of funds to support that. But it doesn't have to be used in that manner either. Some people use it and work the whole way through. It does vary from country to country, the requirements, so it's very important to check the requirements for each country. But the big news is that this program runs for usually the year. It opens up, it closes. So as the year progresses, there are fewer and fewer spots because the caps are being met, and also at a certain point it will close down. And that's varied over the pandemic. For a while it was closed longer, much longer than we would normally see it. But it did reopen on December 19th. So it is open to most countries. Again, you check the country because some of them are still in renegotiations with the government of Canada. You know, it might not be established yet. So there are some, if you look at, you will see that there's a negotiation going on and it actually hasn't opened yet. But most are open now. And it's a really good option for, you know, younger people gaining experience who maybe don't qualify for other types of work permits. And it is open if you are interested, or if there's someone you know that is interested. Because of the caps, we always recommend you apply as soon as possible. You never know when those caps are going to be met and when the program will no longer be available. So at any point that could close down. Usually not quite yet, but you know, as the year progresses, the risk of it closing or not being available becomes higher.
Yeah, but I see, as you said, Shannon, I'm seeing as well. It's a great option for young professionals, young youth, 18 to 35, who don't need that, as you were saying, that LMIA. You don't need that Canadian support. So it's a great option for young people, certainly. I wanted to cover really quickly the expansion of the spousal open work permits next. And that is really a welcome change for a large number of temporary foreign workers in Canada. Previously, for a spouse to be eligible to apply for a spousal open work permit, the spouse in Canada needed to be working in a high-skilled occupation. And with these changes starting on January 30, in just a few days, IRCC has expanded that so that spouses and dependent children of most work permit holders at all skill levels will now be eligible to apply to reunite with their family members here in Canada. So it's a huge change. There are still some exemptions or family members that would not be eligible. For example, spouses and dependents of workers who are in a tier 4 or 5 job under the low wage stream of the seasonal agricultural worker program and the agricultural stream of the temporary foreign worker program. But really, besides these two people working in these two areas, the eligibility has gone up dramatically, and that's going to allow families to reunite here. So, as I said, a huge change for some people who were not eligible to apply for this type of work permit before.
Yeah, and I guess I would just add that at this point in time, we still don't have very clear directions or instructions on how this is going to work from a logistical perspective. And the exact parameters, for example, they have indicated that dependent children can be included in this, but there's no definition of, you know, a cutoff or what, you know, is that 16 and over, or what kind of situation that'll be, and what the process would be to get that authorization. But you know, I personally get a lot of questions from people who are here as foreign workers and want their teenage children to be able to work. And to date, we really they haven't been able to do so. So I think this will be a really good option for people.
Absolutely.
Okay, and then we're just going to move on to processing delays. So, or just general processing information. There still are a lot of delays. We are still seeing, particularly within Canada, on temporary residence applications, work permit extensions, study permit extensions, visitor record extensions. All those applications are taking quite a long time. The listed processing times are quite high, and you know, we definitely are seeing that as well. And I think personally, what I've been seeing is that it seems to have gotten a little bit longer again recently. It had dropped slightly, and I think we're now, for work permit extensions, I think I'm seeing them come in at past 6 months.
Yep, me too.
Yeah, it was kind of in the 5 to 6 month range, and now I'm seeing 6 months or a bit more, which is very lengthy. And you know, I think that the government doesn't prioritize these applications because they have the idea that most people have what we call, well, they maintain their status by applying for the extension before their temporary status expires, and they can continue to engage in the activity that was authorized before. So if they have a work permit and they apply before it expires, they can keep working under the conditions of that work permit that they had. However, it really does impact people, and I'm not sure if the government really understands on the ground what happens. People, it impacts their ability to hold provincial health insurance, which is really significant to people. It impacts their ability to travel. If people are waiting, they may be stuck in Canada waiting for that decision before they can leave, depending on their circumstances. You know, we hear things about people having trouble with their bank accounts, with their credit cards, sometimes with the kids' school. The kids' school's asking for an update and they don't have it. So definitely it impacts people's lives. And so while technically someone may be able to continue doing that, unfortunately there is a real impact to people on their daily lives when this happens. Overseas, it really kind of depends on where your application is pending. Some locations are definitely longer than others, and it will vary from place to place. I am seeing improvement. I do a lot of work in India, and I'm definitely seeing improvement there. Processing times have improved. We're probably in the 1 to 2 month range in India. Now, pre-pandemic, they used to do most of those applications in 2 weeks. So we're still not there, definitely not at the 2-week mark, but you know, we're hopeful maybe sometime we'll get back to that. IRCC has indicated that, you know, this has been in the press quite a bit. There's been a lot of information about it. IRCC has indicated that they're working on it. They're aware of it. They keep announcing that their backlog has dropped. You know, they proudly come out and say we're down to, I don't know where we're at now, 2 million applications pending or something like that, which seems like a significant number to me. I guess it's an improvement, but still not great. So, but they do seem to be, they've been hiring, they're supposed to be working on this. So we are still hopeful we will see improvements, but it seems like the inland applications are maybe the last to get that attention.
And just to add, maybe if I could, Shannon, from what I'm seeing is that applications that are submitted recently do seem to be moving faster, whether it's inside Canada or outside Canada, less so inside Canada, depending on the application, but certainly overseas. And that's consistent with what IRCC has announced, which is that their capacity to process new applications has gone up. So I think they're getting some extra attention as opposed to some of the files that were submitted a few months ago. So there are strategies that we could look at, such as reapplying in some cases. But generally that's what we're seeing, which is the new applications are moving a little bit faster. And two types of applications specifically. One would be the PR card renewal applications, which we were seeing massive delays on for throughout the pandemic and following the months after the pandemic, as well as spousal sponsorships. We're seeing move far faster now, which is a most welcome update for a lot of our clients eagerly waiting to either reunite with family members in Canada or who are here and just waiting to get that immigrant status.
Yeah, the other one I'm also seeing some improvement on, I would say, are just visitor visas. So regular tourist visitor visas. Often I deal with these for family members of foreign workers who didn't initially come with them and now want to join them in Canada. But it could be, you know, it could be just tourism as well. It's inconsistent, but I think they're putting some resources on the visitor visa. There have been some, there's been some information kind of rumbling around that perhaps they're, you know, they're changing the way they're processing it and creating some, you know, making some exceptions to some of their, or the way they're assessing it. They're just trying to expedite that. So I think we will see on the visitor visa front that things will go faster as well. I think that's my understanding from what I've read, is that a large portion of that backlog are visitor visas. And we will start to see some movement there. And I'm seeing some of that too, overseas visitor visas.
And then the one other type of application as well is the study permits. The government has announced, I think a few weeks ago, that their ability to process study permits, they've reached record numbers over the last few months just processing study permits, and most are being looked at within 60 days, which is a huge improvement from before. So all things considered, we hope that the government will continue to make some inroads on these backlogs. It seems like they are. We hope for our clients' sake that just continues to get less and less.
Absolutely. It does impact people, you know, there's the inland, but also overseas, you know, families are separated while they're waiting for these applications to be processed, and there's a lot of impacts that maybe, you know, aren't obvious, you know, they're personal impacts. So we don't always know unless you're dealing with people, those impacts that might be personal to them, separation from family members, or, you know, access to health care. These kinds of things are very important, and these backlogs do impact people. So we really, again, are hoping to see continued improvement there.
There's just, Shannon, I'm noticing there was a question about filing a second TRV application. Do you have any experience with filing, you know, a second TRV application when one is pending for a while?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have certainly done it, and sometimes see the second one move. Usually, I guess the debate is whether to withdraw the initial application. Often I will withdraw it after I file the second one, but it seems to, you know, it'll bump the first one as well. So I think it doesn't seem to cause too much confusion or anything like that. Sometimes if you're going a different route, I have seen confusion where, for example, say a spouse wants an open spousal work permit. They initially apply for that and it's delayed, and then they decide, well, let me try a visitor visa instead so that I can join my partner in Canada, and then they do that. I find when you go, you know, the different routes, when you switch gears, sometimes that causes some problems, because an officer's looking at it and they're saying, well, which one do you want? Do you want the work permit, or are you here as a visitor? And, you know, are you going to come as a visitor and work without authorization? It starts to raise those red flags, and then I find it gets bogged down. But if you're doing a visitor visa application and then it's just delayed and it seems stuck, so you apply for another one, generally that has been fine.
Right. In some cases, I've filed it as well. It doesn't seem, in my experience, just to echo your comments, doesn't seem to cause confusion, especially if you are withdrawing the initial application. That's always a worry and a risk, but practically it doesn't seem to be, as you said, causing any confusion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's important to, if you're switching gears to a different type of application, give that some thought, because that can cause some, you know, some confusion and some delays. But I think if you're refiling essentially the same application, in a lot of ways, it just bumps it up and puts it into that group that's, you know, not stuck. There is kind of some old applications that seem to be stuck.
Yeah.
Okay. Were there any questions?
I think that was everything.
Okay.
All right.
So I think that's it from us.
Perfect. So that's all the time we have for today, everyone. I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar, and a special thanks to Shannon and Peter for sharing their expert knowledge. If you'd like to discuss today's topics in more detail, please reach out to book a consultation, and details can be found on the screen now. I also encourage you to all sign up for our e-alerts and follow us on social media to keep up to date on the latest developments inside immigration. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining.